begin your conference.
Thank you, Pam, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us to review Meg's Q3 2020 operating and financial results. With me this morning is Eric Toews, our CFO, Chi-Tak Yee, our Chief Operating Officer, and Lyle Yuzdepski, our General Counsel and Corporate Secretary. Just a reminder that this call contains forward-looking information. Please refer to the advisories in our disclosure documents filed on SEDAR and on our website. Meg continues to proactively respond to the safety and financial challenges associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to take a second to express my sincere appreciation to all our staff for what they've done and what they continue to do to ensure the health and safety of their teammates, as well as the safe and reliable operation of the Christina Lake facility throughout this pandemic period. Highlights in the quarter include successful completion of the planned 75-day major turnaround on time and under budget, continued reduction in non-energy operating costs and G&A expenses, post-turnaround production exceeding earlier estimates, the addition of 2020 second half WTI hedges to ensure successful completion of the 2020 capital program without drawing the revolver, and continuing to build the cash on hand at year-end to help fund our 2021 capital program. As we head into year-end, we're increasing annual production guidance, decreasing annual G&A and non-operating guidance, and expect to build free cash flow through the balance of the year with 80% of our fourth quarter WTI sales exposure hedged at approximately $46 per barrel. We remain well positioned from a financial liquidity perspective, benefiting not only from our significant 2020 hedge book and the term and structure of its outstanding indebtedness and credit facility, but also from the low decline and low cost of the cost structure of the high quality Christina Lake asset. I'd like to touch on some of these financial and operating highlights of the third quarter in greater detail. Meg realized an average AWB blend sales price of $34.13 US per barrel during the third quarter of 2020, compared to $15.12 US per barrel in the second quarter of 2020. Meg sold 62% of its sales volumes to the U.S. Gulf Coast in the third quarter of 2020 compared to 35% in the second quarter of 2020. This increase in sales to the U.S. Gulf Coast in the third quarter of 2020 is primarily as a result of the corporation's increased contracted transportation capacity on the Flanagan South and Seaway pipeline systems effective July 1st, increasing from 50,000 barrels a day to 100,000 barrels a day. Transportation and storage costs averaged $10.07 US per barrel of AWB blend sales in the third quarter of 2020, compared to $5.92 per barrel in the second quarter of 2020. The increase in transportation and storage costs is primarily due to the fixed costs associated with the increased Flanagan South Seaway contracted capacity and lower apportionment on the Enbridge mainline. The additional transportation capacity afforded by the higher contracted capacity and lower apportionment was underutilized by Meg during the third quarter due to the planned turnaround. Subject to the actual level of apportionment on the Enbridge mainline system, transportation costs are expected to average between $7.50 US and $8.50 US per barrel of AWB blend sales through the remainder of 2020 and 2021. Bitumen production averaged 71,516 barrels per day in the third quarter of 2020 compared to 75,687 barrels in the second quarter. Bitumen production in the third quarter of 2020 was impacted by major planned turnaround activities at the Phase 1 and Phase 2 facilities, which began in early June and were completed in mid-August 2020. The 2020 turnaround was extended in duration to 75 days, expanded in scope relative to base budget in order to minimize staff levels at site during COVID-19 and maximize utilization of Meg's internal resources, thereby lowering overall cash costs. Meg also made the decision to advance turnaround activities from 2021 to significantly reduce the 2021 turnaround requirements. Turnaround was completed on time and under budget, with post-turnaround production exceeding guidance. Notwithstanding multi-decade low crude oil prices, MEG generated $85 million of free cash flow in the 9 months ended September 30th, 2020, and exited the third quarter of 2020 with its credit facility undrawn and $49 million of cash on hand. For the fourth quarter of 2020, MEG has entered into benchmark WTI fixed price hedges for approximately 80% of forecast bitumen production at an average price of $45.76 US per barrel. Based on better than expected production performance during and post-turnaround, MEG is revising upward its full year 2020 average production from 78 to 80,000 barrels a day to 81 to 82,000 barrels a day. G&A expense is now targeted to be in the range of $45 to $47.5 million, or approximately $17.5 million lower than original guidance. Non-energy operating costs are now expected to be in the range of $130 to $135 million, or approximately $32.5 million lower than original guidance. Of the $50 million aggregate reduction in expected costs, approximately $22 million are the result of temporary cost reductions, while the remaining $28 million in cost reductions are the result of continued optimization of operations, reduction in staffing levels, and rationalization of ongoing administrative costs. Finally, the consolidation theme has been front and center with a number of transactions announced in the U.S. and the notable transaction announced earlier this week in Canada between Cenovus and Husky. The consolidation theme is something that MEG is familiar with, and we manage our business to best ensure that we're on our front foot from a transaction perspective and not vulnerable to market dislocations, disadvantaging MEG shareholders. As it relates to oil price volatility, which has been a stated driver of recent transactions, we maintain a constructive view on WCS volatility go forward, as we are seeing positive progress on both Enbridge's Line 3 expansion expected to be in service in the second half of 2021 and the TMX expansion expected in 2022. We have 20,000 barrels a day of blend capacity on TMX, and as you know, we have 100,000 barrels a day of capacity on Flanagan South Seaway. Anecdotally, we see the Alberta government's elimination of curtailment as further evidence of the positive momentum for light-heavy differentials and WCS pricing. With respect to the benchmark WTI pricing, MEG has been relatively successful in protecting cash flow through significant WTI hedges in 2020, allowing for the repayment of $130 million of long-term debt, as well as the building of free cash flow through 2020. We are continuing this hedging discipline as we move into 2021 with approximately 25% of expected sales hedged at around $46 WTI, and we look forward to adding more hedges as the opportunities present themselves. Our modified covenant light revolver remains undrawn, is in place until mid-2024, and our first long-term debt maturity isn't until early 2024, providing us with financial breathing room as we navigate through COVID-related impacts. MEG expects to release its 2021 capital budget in early December. While development of the 2021 capital budget remains in progress, it will be designed to be fully funded with internally generated funds. This is consistent with MEG's financial discipline in 2020, where the current year's capital program remains on track to be fully funded with internally generated funds. Finally, we have an industry-leading cost structure, taking G&A down by $35 million since I joined MEG in 2018, and our non-energy operating costs remain best in class. Once the Cenovus Husky transaction is complete, MEG will be the only pure-play SAGD producer of scale, and we will continue to run our business on our front foot in the best interest of all shareholders. With that, I will turn the call back to the operator for questions.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the question and answer session. Should you have a question, please press star followed by 1 on your touch-tone phone. You'll hear a 3-tone prompt acknowledging your request, and your questions will be polled in the order they are received. Should you wish to decline from the polling process, please press star followed by 2. If you're using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before pressing any keys. One moment for your first question. Your first question comes from Phil Gresh with JP Morgan. Please go ahead.
Yes. Hi, good morning, and thank you for taking my questions. First question was, Derek, on the last call you talked about a $250 million sustaining capital number to maintain production in a kind of 80 to 85,000 barrels a day range, I believe. It looks like the fourth quarter number, the implied guidance is at least at those types of levels coming out of the turnaround. So I was just wondering how you think, do you have any adjustments to that thinking as you enter 2021 about what kind of production you can maintain and what kind of capital will be required?
Phil, thanks for the question. As we think about 2021 at this point, I think we're thinking of our capital number in that $200 to $250 million range. It's still being worked by our technical staff. So I don't think that's really changed since we would have last talked to the market on that. With respect to what the production number is, I think that we're still working through I'd say some flush production associated with the turnaround. Our production is higher than the 85,000 barrels a day that we projected that it would be coming out of turnaround. So we're not ready yet to comment on what the production profile is going to look like next year.
Okay, fair enough. And just any other thoughts on costs as you enter 2021, whether it's non-energy OpEx or just the G&A. I know you mentioned that some of those G&A savings were temporary, but if we continue to be in a challenged pricing environment with WCS kind of around $30, how you'd manage those costs.
Phil, so fundamentally, we manage costs day in, day out, whether we're in a COVID or in a low price or a high price environment. So I think we've done a reasonably good job pointing out the costs which would be fundamentally non-recurring. And I think on the operating side, we're pointing to $15 million, and on the G&A side, we're reporting $7 million. But I don't think people should take away from that we're not going to continue our ongoing work on continuing to reduce G&A and operating costs to the best of our ability each and every day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Your next question comes from Phil Skolnick with 8 Capital. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. When I get two Phils back to back. So just a couple questions. First of all, any update you had talked about, I can't remember if it was the last conference call or the prior conference call before that, potentially looking at using different types of diluents to reduce your diluent need going through the Access pipeline?
Well, Phil, I was going to say Phil too, but that probably isn't appropriate. Thanks for the question. What we've been talking about is a proprietary process that we had hoped to have up and running in a significant way. That there was some new technology that we bolted into Christina Lake that had significant potential to reduce our diluent requirements on a go-forward basis. That equipment is being commissioned as we speak, and we hope that over the next couple of months we're going to start to see whether the bench scale testing that was done that showed a significant reduction in the requirement of diluent to meet pipeline viscosity actually is borne out in the field.
Okay. Is this something that you're working in conjunction with CNRL?
No. We're working with the company that has put this technology forward.
Okay. And then just a final question, just on the during the turnaround, because it was 75 days. I mean, it was because of trying to manage around the COVID risk. But given that you did have that extra time, was there anything that you discovered, maybe any more deep bottleneck opportunities or anything like that?
I don't think there was anything that came out of that in terms of debottlenecking activities. I think we were generally pleased with the state and the condition of the equipment that we saw as we got in and we looked at those things. But nothing from a debottlenecking process. And I should basically say debottlenecking is an ongoing sort of exercise with our facility. So I guess I would have been surprised if anything unusual had come up in the process, as it's a fairly continuous exercise that goes on through on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thanks. That's it for me.
Hey, Phil, just before you go, I think what you may have been referring to was our butane blending operation with CNRL. So that butane blending project is moving forward, and we expect to have it up and operating sometime in the new year.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, should you have any questions, please press star one. Your next question comes from Neil Mehta with Goldman Sachs. Please go ahead.
Hey, good morning. We know it's early out there in Calgary, so thanks for taking the time, guys. The first question I had was just around WTI break even as you think about 2021. Where do you see that, Derek, on a U.S. dollar basis to cover growth in sustaining CapEx next year?
Neil, great question. And don't worry about us getting up early. We're used to that. The break even for from a WTI perspective is typically, I'm going to say, in that mid-40s type range. And that's with what I would call a fairly conventional sort of WTI WCS differential. As you've heard on the call, we believe that the WTI WCS differential is actually in the process of shrinking as more pipeline capacity becomes available, and we're very encouraged about the movement that we've seen in that regard and what that does for the long-term prospects for somebody like ourselves, which is a pure play WCS player. So it's in that $45 range.
And that's at the $200 to $250 million of CapEx?
Yes.
Okay. And then if I can get two questions, and maybe you can comment on both quickly, because I think, your comments on M&A were intriguing. Certainly it's been a big focus here in North America over the last week. Just what role do you see Meg playing in consolidation over time? And then the other is, I'd just love you to flush out your thoughts on WCS a little bit more here. It sounds like you've got a more constructive view. There are some who think that light heavy will widen out because of incremental barrels coming out of the market in Canada. So your perspective on both of those would be awesome.
So just on consolidation, we don't see ourselves being a driver in the consolidation business. We're just going to continue to operate our business, focus on reducing our off costs, our G&A costs, and being sort of the premier low cost pure play WCS producer with a 60-year reserve life. So I'm sorry I can't tell you anything more exciting than we're going to just continue doing what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And on the second part, which was really we appear to be or sound to be more constructive than others may be in terms of the WCS WTI differential. We would point to the fact that storage levels in the province, in Alberta, are at some of the lowest that we've seen historically. We've seen continued small improvements on both the Enbridge system and on the Keystone system. We've got the Northwest Upgrader actually running and processing heavy. All three of those add somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 barrels a day of incremental demand. We're seeing unprecedented levels of interest in our heavy crude in the U.S. Gulf Coast, not only for U.S. Gulf Coast refineries, but and in the Caribbean as well as obviously you saw the Reliance deal and that product moving to India. So we think there's been a step rate change even before you start to consider the Enbridge Line 3 project, which replacement and expansion, which should come on in mid-2021. And it's surprising to us, but people continue to still think that TMX isn't going to get built, even though there's numerous pipeline spreads out with pipe going in the ground. And as we pointed out here again today, I think people have forgotten that we have 20,000 barrels a day of long haul capacity. So I think directionally we're back in a position where pipeline capacity, egress capability is not going to be as big a problem as it has been in the past. That should be reflected in the differentials, and that really is our thesis on why we believe there has been a step rate change, and that's very positive for our business, obviously.
Take care.
Your next question comes from Greg Pardy with RBC Capital Markets. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning. So, Derek, a couple things. The CapEx range you're mentioning here of 200 to 250, and I think the last number I recall you guys talking about was more like 250. But again, if it's equipped to deal with all the sustaining initiatives, have you found additional ways to essentially reduce your sustaining costs? Is that embedded in that, or is the number just not really too worked at this stage?
The number is a fluid number, and when I talk about 200 to 250, I'm also talking, any capital program is going to be cash based. For whatever reason, if we see crude drop to a lower level than sort of that $45 level that we would hope that it could average, we're going to have to pull back on our capital. So I probably didn't explain that well in terms of that range is really predicated on cash being available, but to fully sustain production next year, we need approximately $250 million.
Okay. No, thanks for clarifying that. And I think aside from being the only pure player, or will become the only pure play oil sands producer, you guys are also quite advanced when it comes to solvents. Could you maybe just remind us or just bring us up to date as to how the EM-APEX program is working, and perhaps what you've seen in terms of reduced SORs and so on?
I'm going to ask Chi-Tak Yee, our Chief Operating Officer, and really the primary or the principal behind this whole project, to provide that update.
Okay, thanks, Derek. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
Yeah, so as you know, we have these EM-APEX pilots that have been on close to 3 years now, and just to remind everybody, that's the one that we use propane instead of steam into the reservoir to reduce the viscosity of the oil, so that it can produce at a lower energy intensity. The process is actually working quite well. We actually subdivide the pilot into two pilots so that we can test different aspects of the process. So far, we're seeing a very good reduction in steam oil ratio. In fact, in some cases, we're trending essentially zero. We inject just pure solvent without any steam injection at all. So that pulls, from a steam oil ratio point of view, it pulls out quite well. What we need a bit more time is to understand more on the bitumen recovery end of it. As you know, the well life of these wells is typically 10 plus years, and so we are relatively early into the understanding the bitumen recovery aspect of it. And also another very important economic driver is the solvent recovery. How much solvent you recover from the process. And that one, by and large, it checks out quite well. We're having a very good recovery of the solvent from the reservoir. So, like I said, the remaining point here now is to try to figure out what happens to the bitumen recovery itself, and that's where we're at today.
Okay, and then so you mentioned you've broken the pilot into two, segregated into two pieces. Are you seeing similar results from both? Like, what's the difference between the two?
The first pilot was involved the SAGD well, but that turned on earlier, so it's more advanced in his SAGD process before we implement the solvent, and then also the later pilot involved, as you recall, we actually built a solvent recovery facility for the bigger pilot so that we can reduce the overall cost of the pilot by recycling as much solvent as possible. So the second pilot has a more complete test of the whole package. That includes almost a simultaneous injection of solvent at the same time on all the wells, as well as testing the recycle aspect of it from a surface facility point of view.
Okay, last two for me because we'll move on. But can you what industry averages, I think, in terms of recovery rates are mid to high 50s, I believe. But can you maybe confirm or deny or indicate whether that's a good range or not for the industry, and where would you guys be stacking up?
I imagine you're referring to solvent recovery. Is that your question?
No, it was more on the recycling. The recycling I thought was actually lower than what people were targeting, but
yeah. So there are three recoveries. There's a bitumen recovery we already talked about, and there's a solvent recovery from the reservoir, and then there's a third one is once you recover the solvent from the reservoir, how much of that you can actually recycle and put back to the reservoir. Okay.
Okay.
So from a reservoir, from recovery of solvent from a reservoir point of view, we're doing quite well. I can't give you a very specific number, but it's north of 70%. So which means you inject a barrel of solvent into the reservoir, you get at least 70% of that back. And then the other aspect is once we get this solvent back, because we got contaminants in it, methane and other molecules in it. So the recovery efficiency of that is close to about 90%. Does that answer your question? Oh, did we lose him?
Yeah, it looks like he's no longer in the queue, so I believe you must have answered his question.
All right. Okay.
And Mr. Evans, there are no further questions at this time. You may proceed.
Well, listen, thank you all to everybody that joined the call this morning. It was an early morning. Appreciate your interest, and please don't hesitate to follow up with either Eric or myself with any further questions you might have with respect to the specifics of the quarter. Thank you for your time today.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes your conference call for today. We thank you for participating and ask that you please disconnect your lines. Have a great day.